Welcome to the Week 4 recap for a company league for Notel, delivering best-in-class, flexible workplaces and services for companies across Europe and North America. But who in the league is offering best-in-class fantasy football performances? Let's dive in and find out. Let's start with Charlie's Angels versus Ross's team. Ross's team rode huge performances by C.J. Stroud, Alvin Kamara, and Jaden Reed to a victory over Charlie's Angels. Other than sitting Jordan Addison in this contest, who ended up with 2 touchdowns and over 21 points, Ross's team put out the ideal lineup for this matchup. Ross's team has 2 starting running backs banged up heading into Week 5, with both Jonathan Taylor and Alvin Kamara limited in the early portions of the week and questionable for their Week 5 matchup. It looks like a trip to the waiver wire might be in order for Ross's team, but it's always more fun to hunt the wire after a win. On the other side of the matchup, Charlie's Angels just couldn't get it done. Just a week after a big 4-touchdown performance, Josh Allen takes home the Lionel Richie "Hello, is it me you're looking for?" award, throwing for just under 200 yards and scoring 0 touchdowns for the first time this season. CeeDee Lamb and Jordan Mason put the Angels on their backs, but the lifting was just too heavy for this one as Charlie's Angels falls to 2-2. It was a battle of opposites as a winless Jake's team faced off against the undefeated Sack Street Boys. The Sack Street Boys certainly weren't saying, "I won it that way," this week after posting the lowest scoring output by over 27 points. Sack Street failed to start any players who scored in the double digits. At first glance, you might think poor roster management was to blame, but a quick look at Sack Street's bench tells you it was just an off week for the whole team. And Sack Street's name certainly didn't ring true for the Pittsburgh Steelers defense, who could barely muster a hit against the statue, Joe Flacco. Meanwhile, Jake's team survived the early loss of Rashee Rice
that friggin' hurt.
to his first win of the season. Derrick Henry is this week's fantasy savior after putting up 34.4 points and fueling the victory. Fun fact, Derrick Henry had more fantasy points in his first rush of the game than any player on Sack Street had all week. Okay, that fun fact might not be fun for Sack Street. Depth is a bit of a concern for Sack Street as they go into Week 5 and the start of the bye weeks without any backup running backs and an open roster spot on his bench. Winning him the Pepper Brooks, "That's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him," award. Jake's team improves to 1-3 while it's back to the studio for Sack Street after dropping their first game of the year. Is anybody going to beat What Would Pete Carroll Do? Spoiler alert, not CMC Squared. What Would Pete Carroll Do takes home the old school "We're Going Streaking" award after ripping off 4 straight wins to start the season. Kenneth Walker, wasn't this guy just hurt? He brings home the Back from the Dead award. For a 3-touchdown performance in his first week since a multiple-week injury. Coupled with another 3-touchdown performance from Lamar Jackson and strong games from Kyron Williams and Amon-Ra St. Brown, Pete Carroll was too much to handle, putting up the highest point total in the league, 153.02 points, in a rout of CMC Squared and improving to 4-0. CMC Squared finally got a good performance from Tony Pollard and several strong performances across the board, but couldn't get it done this week. Tough matchup for CMC Squared. He would have defeated 6 out of the 9 opposing fantasy managers this week, but the scheduling gods were not smiling upon him. He's in a good spot moving forward with several solid starting running back options heading into the bye weeks. I mean, if you can have J.K. Dobbins on your bench, you're doing pretty well. But it may be time to think about starting some trade conversations with 3 starting quarterbacks in the lineup. Better days ahead for CMC Squared, whose season hopefully turns out better than CMC's Achilles. Or is it Achilles's? Who knows? CMC moves to 2-2. There's no other way to say this. I think the consultant might want to hire a fantasy football consultant. If they did, they would probably advise him not to start a player on the injured reserve. But that's just me. The consultant takes home the "What Were You Thinking" award.
What are you doing?
For leaving Puka Nacua in the wide receiver slot 3 weeks after hitting the IR. Decent performances by Jalen Hurts, James Conner, and Mike Evans this week, but zeros by Nacua and McBride really hurt. Just putting Christian Kirk or Terry McLaurin into the lineup in Nakua's place would have sealed the victory for the consultant. But what is one manager's loss is another's gain, as EBITDA reaps the benefit of that decision with their first win of the season. Houston's defense and Breece Hall put up stinkers, and they also take home the Steve Urkel "Did I Do That?" award for leaving Chuba Hubbard on the bench. Gibbs, Harrison Jr., and McPherson took over with double-digit performances to fuel EBITDA, better known as every baby inches towards dreary adulthood to their first win of the season. Disclaimer, I have no idea what their team name actually means. Unlike CMC Squared, the scheduling gods must be happy with EBITDA, as their point total would have only defeated one other fantasy manager this week. We finish with the closest matchup of the week. CPU Team 1 finishes with the smallest margin of victory. Less than 6 points separated these two teams. Baker Mayfield continues to show out, scoring 28.88 points in the victory. For Pink Pony Club, a huge week by DeAndre Swift, finally, and the San Francisco D weren't quite enough to score the victory. Pink Pony Club takes home the Cyndi Lauper Time After Time Award for trotting out Mark Andrews again. Pink Pony is going to need to take a serious look at the waiver wire with only Andrews and TJ Hawkinson on the team. Good news, Hawkinson is returning to practice, but may still have some time before playing. And with a record of 0-4, the club doesn't have much wiggle room if the playoffs are in their future. What Would Pete Carroll Do makes a huge jump in the power rankings, going from 4th to 1st, while the consultant suffers the biggest slide, dropping 6 spots from 2nd to 8th. Pete Carroll leads the way, sitting all alone atop the leaderboard at 4-0. CPU Team Number 1 and Sack Street are tied in 2nd at 3-1, but it looks like Sack Street has gotten there on a hope and a prayer, as they have the 3rd lowest point total this season. A whole host of teams log-jammed at 2-2, and Pink Pony Club is the only remaining team without a win at 0-4. Some valuable assets remain on the waiver wire, and they are ripe for the plucking. Quarterback-needy teams may want to snag Brock Purdy before it's too late, and Trey Sermon is bound to be a hot commodity with the injury to Jonathan Taylor. Pink Pony Club doesn't have a ton to choose from on the waiver wire for tight end, but Taysom Hill or Ty Conklin may be some sneaky pickups, and pick up at least 1 point, something Mark Andrews has struggled to do. Alright, let's take a look at next week's matchups. We have CMC Squared taking on Charlie's Angels in a matchup of 2-2 teams. Sack Street looks to get back on track against Ross's team. EBITDA and Jake's team square off in the Battle of the Basement, two teams near the bottom of the standings, both 1-3. CPU Team Number 1 looks to hand What Would Pete Carroll Do with their first loss, and Pink Pony Club looks to get on the scoreboard against the consultant. Now it's all eyes on week number 5. Get out there and hit the waiver wire, propose some one-sided trades, and prepare to take your opponent to the wood.